So what's next for the Culling Games after the events of JJK 268? Well, let's talk about it, but spoilers beware. So this first question today comes to us from Keyblade King, and first of all, shout out from another Kingdom Hearts fan. But he says, what do you think will happen with all of the cursed energy that has been built up from the Culling Games? And are the Culling Games still going on because the remaining players are still alive? And yes, the Culling Games are going on. So let me try to do my best to give like a brief recap of this entire Culling Game situation. Okay, so the Culling Games are still going on because they were designed to never end, regardless of who dies. That's why Kenjaku passing away doesn't matter, and it's also why he wasn't the game master and actually didn't even specify a primary game master, because he didn't want it to be the case where you could just take somebody out and unravel the games. This is also why he intricately wove the rules of the Culling Games into Tengen's barriers, something that is like essential for Jujutsu society as we know it. He didn't want there to be any way to just dismiss these games. And he even says, the only reason I was able to create something as unreasonable as the Culling Game is because I shouldered the burden of the equally unreasonable binding vow to eventually end the Culling Games. And yeah, that's a contradiction, right? Because he created the games to never end. But the only reason he could do that is because he promised to end them somehow. Now, how did Kenjaku accomplish this? Essentially by bullying Kogane to add rules that should not have been allowed. And he only was able to do this because he controlled Tengen. He basically threatened Kogane saying, hey, if you don't add these rules that I want to add, then I'm going to take down Tengen's barriers, which will then end the Culling Game anyway. So it was a lose-lose for Kogane, so they added the rules so that the game would last as long as it possibly could. And the rules he added in that moment were that no new players could join the Culling Game, and that also when all of the players except for himself, Sukuna, and Uruume were dead, then and only then the Culling Games could end. And that condition remains unmet. So even though Sukuna and Kenjaku and Uruume have been defeated, it doesn't matter. The Culling Games will continue until all other players but Megumi are dead. And so all of this begs the question, well, what happens when the Culling Games end? Because it is a matter of when and not if, given those circumstances, right? Is the merger just going to start one day when Megumi's like 88 years old and everyone else has passed away from old age? And I don't think so, because of the last rule that was added, the rule where Kenjaku gives the authority to Megumi to start the merger. And the fact that he has the authority, aka the agency, to launch that implies that there is a decision. So the merger isn't just going to happen the moment the Culling Games ends, but it can only happen the moment the Culling Game ends. So, because Megumi will presumably not want to start the merger, then it seemingly should not happen even when the Culling Game ends, right? But then that begs the question of, well, what are they going to do with all of this cursed energy and setup that has resulted from the Culling Games if they're not going to start the merger? And that is the very interesting question. Can they even do anything else with it, right? Do they have the knowledge in order to shift away from the merger plan and still utilize this power source for something else, for something good, perhaps? You know, a lot of people have theorized, what if they just get rid of cursed energy, or perhaps fulfill Yuki's dream of creating everyone into a sorcerer so that they can all control their cursed energy and there won't be cursed spirits anymore, right? There's definitely possibilities out there, but with only 3 chapters left, is this something that's going to be fleshed out? You know, I don't know. All right, that was a whole lot of yap, and I appreciate you guys bearing with me. So I hope that clears some of it up, and please let me know y'all's thoughts on what you think might happen with all of this. Now, next up, we got this from M. Ivory, who says, I think the person who's yelling at Yuta at the end of the chapter could be a family or clan member of Gojo, because he thinks they would be concerned with their head of the clan. And if it is Yuta, you know, they need to start grooming and training him. And this is a really cool angle that I didn't even consider, but it wouldn't be my first guess just because I feel like that interjects some like new kind of story threads. And with only 3 chapters left, I assume it's going to be somebody we're already familiar with. Next up, Roman says, hey King Yapper, do you listen to any Japanese music? And unfortunately, no, not really. And this is what's really sad, is that I don't have a bunch of time in my life to listen to music anymore. And music used to be such a huge part of my life. So that's like depressing to say, but it's true. But I'd be open to any recommendations you guys have. I'll definitely check out Kinshi. Next up, we got a binding vow from Sluness, who is a YouTube member, so shout out to you, King. But he says, bring back Gojo, and a special grade membership subscription is yours. And you know what? Bet. Deal. I can't make any promises, but I'll do my best. I do still fully expect something from Gojo in these last 3 chapters. I'm not saying it'll necessarily be a full-fledged comeback, but especially given this teaser cliffhanger with whatever's going on with Yuta, I think there is more to develop there. Next, on this very same Yuta Gojo subject, we got this from Sky, who says it's time we lock in on Yuta/Gojo's fusion name. And I'm with you. We need to come to a consensus here. My thoughts are that it should be Yujo Okotoru. Next up, we got another question from a legend, Joma, who is also a YouTube member, and he wants to know if I have any thoughts on Yuki's research as it relates to whatever may happen with the merger. And I did talk about this a little bit at the start of the video, but again, yeah, I certainly think that's a possibility that they may find a way to like utilize the merger, make the best out of a bad situation, you know, and instead of starting the merger, maybe turning everyone into a sorcerer like Yuki wanted. So yeah, I think that's on the table, but I'm not like counting my, what is that phrase? Counting your chickens or whatever. I'm not doing that because there's only 3 chapters left. And again, knowing that everyone else has to die but Megumi for the Culling Games to end, we might not see the end of the Culling Games before JJK ends. We certainly might, especially if they come up with like another way to circumvent around that. But at the very least, I'm hoping we get some dialogue, some exposition on the plan there, if it is something that's going to happen way in the future, but we'll have to see. And I guess just all the legends are out today because we have yet another YouTube member comment, this time from Tiberius, who is sharing his thoughts on Kenjaku's domain expansion. So y'all pause to read this, but this is in relation to my recent video where I talk about this. Is it Kenjaku's domain or is it Geto's? And I agree with you. I definitely am leaning towards that being Geto's domain expansion that we saw. And I also agree with you that Geto just doesn't have a barrierless domain by default. That is a result of Kenjaku's expertise with barrier techniques. He's the reason he made that barrierless, and it's not just, you know, again, innately that way or anything. Next up, Alexander's wants to know, what are my thoughts on the hypothetical where everyone has to fight Gojo instead of Sukuna? And I think they get clapped, like Gojo stomps, unless Sukuna is going to help Team Good Guy against Gojo. But if Sukuna's not helping, then yeah, they get clapped. Because the only reason they beat Sukuna is because Gojo wore him down so much, and Yuji and all of the soul stuff against Sukuna. Gojo doesn't have, you know, a megumi to split him away from, so they don't have that advantage. And again, without Sukuna wearing down Gojo first, they just don't stand a chance, in my opinion. Next up, we got a bit of a longer one from Zach, and y'all can pause to read it, but he's basically just voicing his opinion on the elements of the ending of this story that he didn't like. And I hear you, man. To each their own 100%, and I don't even really want to like offer my counter perspective on this because I don't want it to come across like I'm being dismissive or that I'm trying to like convince you that you're wrong or anything, because that's not true, because it is subjective at the end of the day. So, you know, I understand if those weren't your cup of tea and you wish it had gone another way. The one thing I will say, though, is that like you, I too know that I'm going to end this series with still a lot of questions about things, and that can be frustrating for sure. And this isn't just a straight up defensive Gege, because what I'll say is, yes, I'm going to want to know some of those things too, but I do really enjoy stories and authors where they know where they want to end and they end, as opposed to the opposite of something just is drawn out and beaten to death and we just stare at its zombified corpse. So again, not saying Gege couldn't have done better answering some things or anything like that, but of the 2 scenarios, I love stories that end on their own terms like this compared to the opposite. Next up, we got a bit of a longer one here from Triple Sokka, so y'all pause to read it, but Sokka is referencing my recent video where I ask, could Vader force choke Gojo? Could he get past infinity? He says, in a similar vein, do I think that Dio from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure would be able to punch Gojo with his time stop ability? So I gotta let you know that I've only seen parts 1 and 2 of JoJo so far, and I don't think I've gotten to that part yet, so I don't know the full nuance of how time stop works. But logically as you can be when you're thinking about a time stop situation, I think that would likely allow him to get past infinity. Unless Gojo's infinity was already active before time stopped, then that infinite distance would logically still be there even if time wasn't passing. So he may still be able to defend himself if he knew it was coming, if that makes sense. And speaking of that Vader video, Crackers here is letting me know that due to how the Force works, it should already be present behind Gojo's infinity, meaning Vader would likely be able to Force choke him. So I stand corrected on that. Next up, we got several questions from B-Top here, who is also a YouTube member. You guys are really showing out today. Thank you so much. But let's roll through these one by one. In this first one here, y'all can pause to read it, but it essentially deals with the only one will live or only one will die thing that we've talked at length about. B is saying, like, who's to say that's actually going to be what happens, since Gege has said other stuff in the past, like that Sukuna will eat an important character, and that seemingly isn't going to happen since Sukuna was just defeated, right? So I'm really glad you brought this up. So the first thing I'll say is the whole one will live or only one will die thing. I wouldn't be surprised if Gege moved away from that, because yeah, he did say that, but it was like 3 years ago. So, you know, I don't think anyone's holding him to a binding vow that the story has to end that way, but it would still be my assumption that it's going to end that way. But like you point out, this whole Sukuna thing, that seemingly didn't happen, right? Well, what's interesting about that is that's not true. That was a misquote, and I myself have been guilty of spreading this because I talked about this in, I think, 2 different videos at one point, but it had since been revealed that that was a misattributed quote thanks to a YouTube video that translated that interview from Gege. That was the YouTuber's thoughts that said that. But what's annoying is in that video, there is no indication that they have swapped from actually translating Gege to just applying their own analysis. So yeah, that is one of the most misquoted parts of Gege, because he never said that. But, you know, Sukuna is a cannibal. We know that to be true, so that still is true. But yeah, the whole Gege saying, I hope he doesn't eat somebody someday, wasn't Gege. It was just a random YouTuber. And then B's second question wants to know why so many people think Gojo is the one that said, Yuta, you son of a, at the end of the previous chapter, because he doesn't remember Gojo cursing like that. Did I miss something? And no, you didn't miss anything. And especially that specific phrasing is just one translation. I saw another translation where there is no vulgarity in that statement. So I don't think people are really reading into it that much that like Gojo would specifically use that insult or anything, but more of just Gojo kind of fits the general archetype of somebody who might be chastising Yuta in that moment. Now, again, I think it was Maki more than likely, but I do think it really could have been anyone. Then B's third question is, if Rika would have consumed Mahito, would Yuta have been able to copy and use idol transfiguration? And I don't think we ever have any hard evidence on how Yuta's technique works when copying a cursed spirit, so I don't know if he could do that or not. But yeah, if he could have, that would have been a massive game changer. Next up, B wants to know why Gojo didn't use his teleportation against Sukuna. And this is a good question, but my own headcanon for why is that there really wasn't a true purpose to, because I think Gojo's innate speed without teleportation served him better in the close quarters combat situation. Like, I think he was just as, if not faster than Sukuna, so he didn't really need to teleport to try and gain an advantage. Plus, he has to use hand signs when he teleports, which makes it perhaps even slower than just his innate speed for the circumstance, if that makes sense. And also, Gojo was never trying to like run away from Sukuna, and if that had been the case, I think we might have seen him use it. Next, could the world cutting slash cut through the prison realm? Yes. And if so, what do you think would happen to the person inside? I think there's 2 options. A, they'd either get let out, or B, they'd be trapped in there forever because now the door, aka the prison realm, has been destroyed, so now there's no way for them to get out. Next, assuming Yuta is in Gojo's body, can't we just swap him in Yuta's own body, hence problem solved? And we don't know, and I would assume no, considering that hasn't happened. Like, if this is an issue, you'd think they would have tried that by now. But we may require 2, like, willing souls in order to do that, and if Yuta's body is empty, there's no one in there to swap with, if that makes sense. And then finally, we got 2 hypothetical matchups here. End of series Yuta versus evolved Mahito. I'm going Yuta. He's just on a whole different level, and if nothing else, he could damage him with RCT. And then end of series Maki versus 20 Fingers Sukuna, but they both only use hands, Sukuna. Next up, Panda wants to know if Yuji could use Shrine through his blood. Like, in the same way we know that Yuji and Sukuna need to, like, touch their opponent in order to use Cleave, could blood serve as his touch since he has blood manipulation? And that's a really cool idea, but I don't feel confident at all in giving you an answer. I would lean no, that it wouldn't work, but I would love to see, like, Yuji just wilding out combining both of those abilities. So, JJK Part 2, please? Next up, we got a funny one from Nate. He wants to know who smokes the green in JJK. Mekamaru for sure, Mai, Hikari, Kirara, and probably Shoko and Udahime on occasion. That's going to do it for this one, y'all. Thank you guys so much for sending in your support and for watching, and I will see you soon.